Hello everyone, my name is Oleksandr, I am working at Edument. Occasionally I contribute to Raku and recently suggested a couple of solutions to the issues of the documentation website we have. In this talk I'll try to touch upon both HUDs and exterior fit. My primary goal here is not to rant and be aggressively sarcastic about the state of things, but please keep listening. First, we will look in a super brief manner at how the website started and evolved up to now, exploring difficulties and solutions. Next, I'll talk about the latest, most major issues we tried to overcome, and I'll try to formulate basics of the major tasks we still have to do. Now, history time. But relax, I won't say any exact dates, knowing how boring this part of history classes. So, once upon a time, more than a decade ago, we had the Raku doc, former pod language, and it was alright, I guess. So, the writers started to document things using this language, and they needed some tool to convert it into an actual website people can look at. Here, the htmlify script comes into the game. Originally, it gathered all the Rakudoc files into a special registry provided by Rakudo, then relied on the fresh pod2html module to render the files, and as a result created a whole directory of HTML files. If you added an asset here and there, run engines to serve those files over the internet, and bingo, in a very short amount of time the task is done. Now, closer to specifics and what were the consequences. The good thing is that it was very fast to build. The whip-up aspect of the script was one of the good sides I can name. It looked really simple as well. Get the files, render them using pod2html, then add a chunk of assets and it's good. Unfortunately, over time it was clear the solution was very hard to manage. The website demanded more and more things, and at some point it became unmanageable to fix something without breaking something else. And there were certainly things to fix. The development was fast enough to overlook a couple of issues, being natural outcomes of the decisions done at that time. While the last thing can be considered rather individual, I believe such a setup introduces too much coupling in the system. All the software is written in the specific way necessary to produce one very specific website, making any big changes to the website looking scary. The second thing, props to JJ, is a natural evolution of the script called Documentable. Documentable is a Raku distribution library model, call it whatever you like, which emerged to address a number of issues of the script. As you can see, the core setup remains the same. We take the files, assets, and together with the pod2html we create a bunch of HTML files we serve. But note the new elements here. Compared to the script, Documentable provides you a higher level API to the registry of Rakudoc files, including search in a collection and common useful manipulations such as adding the superclass methods Rakudoc to Rakudoc of the class itself. This API is such a killer feature of Documentable you can't even imagine how much did it improve the quality of life. But it has even more cool features. So we already discussed the fact the Rakudoc file manipulation was effectively factored out by this distribution, even if the facade still did the same thing as the script did. However, Documentable used the coolest model out here, called pod2cache. Prior to this, if you did a change in a single file, you had to run the script which regenerates all the files, hundreds of them, to see the change, which is of course a great pain. But since our community member Fine Analyst wrote the model, we could cache the ready Raku doc files and on changes detect and render only those that needed, which of course dramatically decreased time necessary to see the changes. Right now the model was updated with its latest replacement pod from cache, but either way that's a great thing to have. The second thing Documentable has compared to the script is essentially testing. As a distribution, it has its own test suite where it tries to ensure the behavior is sensible in an automatic manner. At least in some places it saves us from development hell. Now, of course, the problems. First, Documentable took quite a lot of code from the script, wrapping it in a new structure but leaving all the decisions. Almost all the shady conventions of how the sources are processed were taken as is without any changes. From one perspective, it saves the legacy references URLs to the website accumulated over the for all the years, but from another, if you walked 1000 miles into wrong direction, you still have to go back. This was backed by the fact that while not really an approach disadvantage, but Documentable continued to behave as almost a drop-in replacement for the script when it in fact was much more powerful. Also, arguably, if we look at it as a Raku doc files content manipulation API, it knows too much about the assets and the structure of the exact website we have. From the historical perspective, from an attempt to address some of the dubious aspects of the whole system, a distribution called Collection has emerged, done mostly by Richard, also known as already mentioned Fine Analyst. Collection is a generic system allowing to generate websites from a collection of Raku doc files. To make that real, it uses extensible processing happening in phases. You can write plugins translating custom Raku doc codes, and so it also provides an alternative way to build the current website now. For those concerned, please do watch talk about this model on the conference. For historical reasons, some other community members decided to approach the current website numerous issues from not the backend writer but end user point of view. From this perspective, a couple of things were of huge urgency. Here first comes the UI of the old website. Few people cannot agree and it does not look outdated, and Raku deserves a more polished one. The second thing comes from using static files in a very simple way for all this time. One specific bit of the Raku programming language is that it uses plenty, and I mean plenty, special characters. Say you want to index to create a page with a colon or a Unicode symbol in it. What happens next? You create files with appropriate names and then wait, no, you won't. You can't have Unicode characters in a properly formatted URL. You need to encode them using the % encoding schema. And second, you can't have the colon character in the file path. A natural solution would be to use % encoding for all the names, but instead the system wrote files using some very specific encoding schema, for example, replacing the colon character with a huge $, $string, and when this leaked to the end users, it leaked really badly. Because we served the static files engines and its rewrites, as well as its kindness to serve URLs that are not really properly formatted, all of these were the tricks we used to pretend the situation works, but the primary concern here remains. We still need to have a proper, well-escaped URLs for all the pages making sense for all the software according to the official specs. Next, search. Quite a lot of concerns were about the search being far from perfect, so if you are going to rebuild things, why ignore the elephant in the room? And last but not the least is the fact that the language is alive and changes, so we must deal with it appropriately. Here you can see the schema suggested to deal with the issues. As usual, we have Raku doc files as the primary source of the content information. What types, part of the language, routines, and so on are documented. It is a single repo everyone can commit to. It has plenty of testing and simple, short guidelines, so most of the authors are concerned only with those. Then, Documentable provides us API to work with the Raku doc files. In another repo related to the website, we have a crawl application plus all the assets necessary. Then application forms URL routine we want, extensible and clean dynamic one. The assets are also related to this website only, and if you want to change, say, the UI completely, you certainly can do it at ease, because not the documentable way of forming a bunch of static files, nor assets in the doc repo concern you anymore. The content and the presentation are rather independent. It also uses the pod to HTML repo, but improved. When you use it rather carefully to just once convert a number of files one by one, you don't need to worry about things like concurrency. You can live on with global variables in the code, and if you are generating only one particular website with it, you can live with some elements being just hard-coded. So to work with a dynamic site, we had to make it stronger, more reliable, more extensible and faster with the help of the crouching plates. I can also note this architecture allows us to extend the whole schema with more generators. Other modules can utilize the Documentable API to gather the content files and produce ready documentation sets in other formats, not just web format. Let's look at the new UI. Here you can see the main page. The same URL structure can be seen on language pages, types, routines and programs, of course. We can visit some of them. Here you can see various tutorials and guidelines gathered by category. By the way, you can change the theme too if you prefer darker colors, for example. So we can open some example. Of course, the code examples, they are colored, and you can run them and results. Oh, by the way, you can even edit them, and of course it works. Okay, also we have a search. We can search for some, like any type. No, I want any method. Okay, it works. And so we can see so far the UI looks alright, okay, but please report problems if you see them, and more so please contribute if you like what you see. The next challenge we already described fairly well. In the hindsight, the way the static files serving was implemented is dubious, and we have to change it. With the new approach giving us a dynamic routine, we can implement a set of routes serving for backward compatibility and a system catching and reporting visits through non-existing URLs. This way, there is no need to investigate all the possible legacy URLs created by a bug, an accident or not, during the decade, and pick those that are actually linked from somewhere in the outer world. Instead, in a gradual manner, we can build up a system of routes to redirect people from the URLs they know to those making sense according to the web standards. As you saw, the search got some goodies, but in my opinion, what matters is consistency over features. Let's look at how the search works on the website. You type in the keyword and can search among the types, routines, pages related to the language in general, and also not only complete pages, but exact paragraphs place within the pages. So we have a mapping from the search entry item to exact page or specific place on the page. While the first one is generated automatically by the software, the second number of references is indexed by hand of the writers using the X formatting code. As usual with Raku, the syntax of this formatting code is very advanced. You can index a term without text rendered in the actual document, index more than one term in a single formatting code. By the way, every index entry can have a number of upper-level terms, creating a tree-like hierarchy. Speaking about the docs, as we know them, the original idea was to apparently use the second level of the term to denote a category of the entry, be it a routine or a trait or something belonging to a general reference. The problem is, or was, due to unclear documentation, people often misuse the syntax, for example, mistaking where the index entry text should be and the category itself. The set of categories we index things into was never really defined. People just sort of invented them on the spot, leading to accumulation of problems in this area. Much worse, the software processing the indexes to create URL anchors to point to a specific piece of content on the HTML page simply included everything available in the formatting code to form an anchor. What this means is that different ways of using this formatting code all over the docs, yes, there are thousands of such references, had no predictable and uniform format of the URL anchors for them, but a disorder and chaos, confusing people, the worst one can take from the TeamToady world. The ticket noting out the whole situation was opened 5 years ago, and at last recently a great migration was done. For writers, it means a couple of things. Most forms of the X formatting code are restricted to the simplest ones, which are the easiest to understand and process. They are to be documented and expressed in the form of a test suite. Next, a set of the categories is decided. Next, all the references in the documentation were converted to match the new guidelines. Next, the processing software was tweaked to form URL based on the index entry text, not the category, for example, which results in a more uniform format of URLs and allows changing, say, the text of the reference or a category without losing the URL. And as the last point, unfortunately, this area had issues with percent and escaping URL parts too, so now they are escaped too. So far, we looked at some fundamental issues and solutions applied to them. From now on, it's the territory of new bits we have to deal with. Let's talk about versioning. People too often confuse two entirely different things, so let's go piece by piece with this. First thing is the fact the language we try to document is a moving target. It means sometimes things got added, removed, renamed, or changed completely. Say we have a method X and it returned a list yesterday, but returns an array today. How can we approach the case now? We edit the method description. What about people who use older Raku versions? They don't get the info. Let's imagine the next situation. The method was removed completely. What's next? We can remove it. What happens to the URLs pointing to this method? Sure, they are broken. Does it mean with every change we lose pieces of information and break people's URLs? In short, yes, we do. How can we approach it differently? First, we need to start to version our documentation just like it's done universally for all the languages out there. As people were busy with heavy lifting the problems we already saw, this field is pretty new for decisions, so maybe your perspective would be very precious. It's not yet clear how exactly should we proceed. The first part of the puzzle is to prevent breaking URLs by deletion and changing content. Say, at some point of the time you declare the documentation is the first edition now in its current state. Then people do changes for months and you declare, alright, now it's version 1.1 or maybe 2 or maybe the date, I have no idea. So the idea is that the URLs can convey what version of the docs is displayed for the user. You can see the old ones, they are rendered perfectly, and if the version is encoded in the URL, you should get a guarantee you will be able to open the page and be welcome with, oh, this page is outdated, but it's not a horrible 404 error for you. Should it be tied to Raku releases? I don't know, probably not. But the fact is that the information is being constantly rewritten is something we should really deal with maybe later, but better than never. The second thing to look at is how we describe versions. You may have seen the remarks saying something along the lines of this and that was changed or introduced in this release of Raku. My issue with that is that all those lines are written a bit differently. There are no real official policies, guidelines, standards, nothing describing how the authors should work with this type of information. As Raku syntax is flexible, it would be awesome to enforce something simple, consistent, and testable for documentation writers instead of going the inconsistency and obscurity hell road one more time. Not only Raku specific things, but we can also reuse such a format for, say, operating system dependent things or just warnings and render them in some cool, easy to notice for the reader way. As the last point, I would like to note a couple of things I myself stand on as priorities related to future of the Raku documentation. First, let's forget about overcomplicating things for writers. Make simplicity and being absolutely obvious the main concern, plus a whole really hard about preventing misunderstandings and creating bugs from the beginning. Short and clear guidelines and testing, they do help here. Second, documentation is documentation and its presentation they should have very little idea about each other. Third, we promote Raku as a modern language, so things we present to end users should look shiny. Shameless advertisement time. So come write something to the Raku Doc channel on Libero, contribute to docs as a writer, or contribute to the front end as a programmer. And now just ask me anything. Still waiting for questions.
Hello, this is Anton. I have a question.
Yep.
So the computable documents, that's very interesting. Can you comment on what is the relation with, say, the Jupyter kind of connection with Raku? It seems to me that we're replacing 0MQ, which is the connection of Jupyter and Raku, with CRO. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm not sure about that. The thing is how I implemented execution of examples is basically most simple things that would work. So there are, I have a Docker container actually borrowed from the hlot.io project. And so when you press the run button, by JS, the code is sent back to the server, and the server pings the running Docker container, like, please execute this piece of code for me as a script, and then it gathers the output and passes it back to the website. So there is nothing fancy or like live interpreter kind of thing. It's just a simple how in, how out type of kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So you from a document, you're making a script, you execute on the script on Docker, and then you return the results.
Yes.
Great.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Alexander. I have a related question.
Yes.
Great presentation, great new site. That's great. Would it be possible for me to go build my own site with this feature where I can run cells with Raku inside a website?
Absolutely. I'm not sure if you are referring to hosting your own instance of what was built. Yes, sure. You will need a bit more advanced setup than just documentable as before, but anyway, so there are ready Docker files in the repo. So you can just run them, and that's it. Just build, run the container, and it works. That's if you are referring to running the same instance of what I did. Because the repo is public, so I hope anyone with Docker can run it. And without Docker, you can run it too, basically. But it's just that the setup is a bit more complicated. And if you want to build an entirely different website with entirely different UI, it's also really possible. I think that's what's great about Documentable. It gives you API, and you can ask it like, okay, give me the port for the any type or for such a method, and then you can process it somehow, rendering in any way, because the content doesn't know anything about the exact website. That was the primary idea. Yep, thank you. Any other questions?
Is there anything like unit testing the example code or guaranteeing that it works in any fashion?
For the website itself, or for documentable like helper libraries?
Both, either?
Either. Okay, so for helper libraries like pod2html, for example, of course, absolutely. For the website itself, no, but you are welcome to write some. The thing is, the whole thing was quite heavy lifting, because you have to deal with quite a lot of things at once. I think this website only closes like 30, more than 30 tickets in the doc repo. Some of them are big. So you just, well, also I'm lazy, so I don't write tests if I am not at work. At work I'm writing them always. Trust me. Yeah, Jonathan knows I work with him, so that's it.
I have a question. Is this this is on basically this exists currently in a repository? So if you want to see it, you have to run it yourself. It's not available in some sort of beta website.
Okay, it is available at because I hosted it myself, so it's just an IP and a port. I can like write it in chat if you fancy. So all right, I just wrote the URL to the chat, so please break it. I am pretty sure it does not run in a production mode, so some pages can load pretty slowly for the first time, and then they are cached. So just be sure that if some page loads for like 5 seconds, it's all right. But yes, there is a demo, and I think with the rest of the people concerned, we are kind of looking for a good way, or maybe good timing, to replace the current website with this one. If no one objects, because in the past there were some quarrels about if we should or shouldn't. So yes, you can try out the demo, and hopefully in soonish we will eventually replace the old websites. That's the plan. Yep. Any other questions?
And so this is a question both for Oleksandr and Steve. Actually, anyone who has used notebooks solutions with Raku, is it worth to translate these documents into notebooks, be that Jupyter or whatever? Because then there's some interactivity with which the experimentation with the documents, right? It can, I mean, this is how I see it, and it's not that hard, right? I mean, it's just right. It's just rewriting POT6 or HTML into whatever notebook formats. I'm looking for opinions here.
I'm not entirely sure what your point is. If you mean integrating some sort of live Raku interpreter with the website, then I think it can be done. In my opinion, you will have more problems with JS parts.
No, that's a little bit more complicated, but yes,
Okay.
in that direction. I would rather have a downloadable version of the documents which are on the website, downloadable version as a notebook with which I can experiment and probably use some different examples and whatever, right? So this was my point. But something like what you're proposing actually would be very nice, right? So I mean, have this kind of online notebook evaluations. So
true, but I think for all the time I'm working on this project, one of my main concerns is that we really lack JavaScript coders. It's strange because the language is popular, but apparently not a lot of people are up to contributing somehow. That's the main blockers I had to write something myself, but I'm not that good. So
all right, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.